Alright, in this video we're going to take a look at the quiz that we did with data distribution and describing those distributions. You guys were asked to write a well-written paragraph describing the distribution of these semester test scores from 9th grade students at Prairie Point. So if we look at the histogram here, we know that there are three pieces of describing histograms. We want to look at the data, between the data, and beyond the data. At the data is when we look at specific values. Now, since we're just given a histogram here with intervals, we're not given too many specific values. We don't know all these different numbers, so we cannot calculate things like the mean or the median or the mode. We could maybe talk about where we think they would be, but again, if you're not given the specific values, those aren't things that you necessarily need to calculate. Had we been given specific values, had we been told that the values here were 21, 24, 27, and 28, then we would be able to calculate those things. What we can look at is the minimum and maximum. We can say that the minimum would be somewhere between 20 and 100, or 20 and 29. The maximum would be somewhere in between 90 and 100. Some people made a mistake on their tests here. They said that the maximum would be 37 and that the minimum would be 2 or 3. Whatever they thought this bar was here. Those are the counts. That's the students scoring in those intervals. We're specifically looking at the test scores, so we don't want to talk about minimums and maximums in terms of how many students scored where. We want to talk about their scores. So to clarify there, our minimum would probably be anywhere between 20 and 29, and you can talk about that as an interval, or you could say our minimum is about 20. So we can talk about that in a little more loosely than we have been in class. And then our maximum would be anywhere from 90 to 100. Okay, and so you could talk about the range being anywhere from 80 to 70, looking at those things, or 80 to 60 there. Okay, so we can talk about minimum and maximum and range. Again, we can't talk really about specifics, mean, median, mode, those kinds of things, so we don't need to look there. So that's really what we need to do when looking at the data. Looking between the data, we're talking about clusters and gaps. We notice that there's a big cluster, 37 students score from 90 to 100. And then maybe you want to talk about a cluster here as well. But this is definitely our highest area of data. And if we were to add these up, if we were to maybe say this was 37, and then this was 22, and this was 30, here we have, let's say, 23, 24, let's say this is 7, 7, and alright, so if we add those up, we get 151. So 37 of our 151 students scored between 90 and 100. That equals 0.245, which is 24.5%, almost a quarter of the students scored there. We might want to talk about other clusters as well. A gap, we notice that no one scored below 20, so we can talk about that as a gap. All right, so that's looking between the data, and then we're asked to look beyond the data. A lot of you mentioned that we kind of looked like a hill here, but we mentioned before you don't want to say things like the data looks like a hill, because this is a hill, and this kind of looks like a hill, and this kind of looks like a hill. So we want to be a little bit more descriptive using the vocabulary words that we've learned. All right. We've learned that when a data distribution skews off to the left there, we call it skewed left. A lot of you mentioned the fact that we dipped down there between 80 and 89. Less students performed in the 80 to 89 range, which is maybe worth mentioning. But overall, looking beyond the data, we are skewed to the left here, so that's something that we want to talk about in our data as well. Now, notice I have a lot of scratches around here. I've just kind of formulated through my thoughts. I haven't really put this into words yet. So I have a paragraph written out here that might be a strong example of how to describe this data. Let me read it for you. The histogram, excuse me. Let me read it for you. The histogram on the previous page looks at semester test scores of 9th grade students at Prairie Point. So that's all you might need for an introduction sentence there. These test scores range from about 20 to 100, although we're not given specific values. That's a good way of saying what our minimum is, what our maximum is, and what our range is all in one sentence. And then I also covered the fact that we don't look at specific values, and that will tell our reader that we're not going to talk about mean, median, mode, and all those things. I go on to say that the highest percentage of students scored from 90 to 100, with almost a quarter of the students scoring there. So there I'm talking about a cluster. None of the students scored from below 20 points, which I'm sure relieves the teacher. Obviously there I'm talking about a gap. The overall shape of the data is skewed to the left, with our peak being at the very end, 90 to 100. Okay, talking about the shape of the distribution. The column in the 80 to 90 range is interesting because it drops down quite a bit, not fitting with the skew of the data. So there I wanted to address that fact that the 80 to 90 column was kind of unique. So I just put that in there. I mean, it doesn't really fit with anything we've talked about, but that's fine. It's something interesting to add. And then I close with the fact that I think that it's safe to say most of the students pass this test, although I'm sure the students would like, or the teacher would like to see more of the scores above passing. All right, so that might be a good example of what a stronger paragraph would look like for this data distribution. Keep in mind when you guys take the retakes that if we are given specific values, you can calculate the mean, median, and mode, and talk about where those would lie. So let's say our mean was here. You might want to talk about where that lies within the data and where the mean lies in the median and all those different topics. Okay? All right, so I think you're ready for a retake. Let me know if you have any specific questions from this video. I'd like you to try to rewrite your paragraph that you did for this distribution so that you have a better sounding paragraph. Also, try not to just copy verbatim what I've said here, but really work on that before you come in for your retake.